I'm talking with Elizabeth Day, or Liz Day, and she is a tutor and a supervisor at the Professional Doctorate in Systemic Practices at the University of Bedfordshire. And I am Petra Deij from Holland, and in English that is better known as Petra Deij. Also, and Liz and I, we know each other from the program, and Liz is one of my supervisors in my program. So we have been knowing each other now for 2.5 years or something. And I'm glad and excited to do it reversely now, instead of talking about me and my project, talking about you and your project and how you see the PDSP program and, well, everything that's around that.
Yes.
Yeah. You.
So, what would you like me to start with? Do you want me to say something about me, or?
Yeah, and I think that's a good idea if you want to introduce yourself on that, or I can maybe you and where you are now, and if that was ever a thing that you see happen. Did you see yourself as an academic at the start, and to put it in perspective where you are now and how you started, because you. Maybe that's a good thing to say. You once were a doctorate student at the same program as well, weren't you?
I was, and I got enrolled in it without having asked to be. So I got I can't remember, it was a letter. I think it was probably an email from KCC, there was an administrator there called Chris. And I got this email from Chris, which said, these are the dates of the doctoral weekend, which I understand you're interested in. And I thought, well, I don't think I ever said I was. But in some ways I was. So I came along to what I thought was a sort of a weekend talking about it, but what it actually seemed to be was the beginning of it.
Okay.
Because there were all the people there who were then on the doctoral program, although I think there were a couple that didn't actually start. But there was a big group of us, and a number of people from Scandinavia and from Europe. So they wouldn't really have just flown in for a sort of chat at a weekend, would they? I don't think. So I think it was the beginning, really.
And all the others knew, but only you didn't know.
I didn't really know. But it actually fitted very well for me, because I developed, along with colleagues, I developed a program which we'd published, and which was much more successful than we'd ever anticipated. So it seemed exactly the right sort of time to be doing something like research into what was going on. So it fitted really well. So I had been thinking about doing research. And maybe I must have mentioned it to somebody, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, I found myself there. and that was just the beginning of it.
Okay, good. That's kind of a funny story, isn't it? Yeah.
And also then there was a sort of 5-day event, or maybe it was 3, but I couldn't go on that because I'd already booked to go on holiday, because I hadn't known anything about it. So they said, oh, well, the first cohort of meetings, so come to that. So my first real meeting was actually finding myself with Gail and the rest of that cohort. So it wasn't even with cohort 2. I was actually part of cohort 1 for a few days.
Okay. So and Gail Simon, the current program leader, was in cohort one from the same doctorate.
Yes.
So there's a whole, and I know there are more people who are involved now with the program who did the program by themselves. I think all tutors, maybe not all supervised, but I think all tutors from the program at this time have been doing the same doctorates. Or am I mistaken?
Well, the tutors on the program, sort of the key tutors are all people who are systemic.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Systemic doctorate. A lot of the supervisors aren't necessarily.
Yeah.
We always have one systemic supervisor, but we have teams of supervisors. So the other supervisors are from different bits of the university and have different interests. But what we try and do is match people with the sort of the research area that they're interested in.
Yeah. And that's something nice to say, because there are a lot of, it is a program for systemic practices, but it's not only for systemic therapists or people working in healthcare or in what's the word in English? Providing help.
Yeah.
It's much broader than that, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So there are people who are sort of in leadership or in more sort of organizational areas. Mostly it's been people who have therapy as one of their main areas of work. But they might not be researching particularly into that. They might be thinking more about, I suppose, like you, about their supervisory practice, how they encourage people in teams. So they might be coming from different angles.
Yeah.
But it's all about looking at your own practice.
Yes. So that's really the thing, isn't it? And I know. I'm sorry. I know that it's quite common, isn't it? A professional doctorate in UK or in Australia or United States and Canada.
Well, I probably I'm not the best person to ask that question to. I mean, there is another professional systemic doctorate in the UK, which is at the Tavistock. And yes, I know there are other professional doctorates in other areas, but I don't know a lot about that. I know Yale does, and that there are conferences where people come together who are involved in professional doctorates.
Yes. So that's really interesting for, of course, I would like to hear you talk about more about what you've been doing, but I think, it's good to talk a little bit about what is different about a professional doctorate than about, how can I say it, a normal, and here I go, already, a normal PhD. And I know in Holland it's very unknown, so I had to and still have to explain a lot about what I'm doing. How is a professional doctorate like a real PhD? So what do you think that the difference is? What is the emphasis in a professional doctorate, in this doctorate?
I think the emphasis is that what you're doing is researching into your own practice, so it's very much something which is relational. It's something which is about where you are, and your practice is at the center.
Yeah.
Whereas when I sometimes I used to find myself, particularly when at the beginning of doing the doctorate, I'd be at social events and people would hear I was doing a doctorate and they were doing a doctorate too. So they'd ask me a whole lot of questions, none of which I knew the answer to, which made me realize that what they were doing was completely different to what I was doing. And I learnt from a friend whose son is very bright and was doing a PhD, that it's very common that what someone's PhD is something their supervisor is researching, has bits that they haven't got time to do. So they get one of their PhD students to do that bit of research, and it feeds into the research of the supervisor. So they've not even got to choose the area that they want to research. They're being told what to do, and it isn't theirs. And so it's a very, very different thing. I mean, that's the extreme end, I think.
Yeah, but I recognize that, and what I know from colleagues here in Holland, that there is a certain fellowship, and you can apply for that place, for that research. While how I experience it, exactly how you say it, this is about what are you interested in, and you are more or less completely free. I think even more than less, completely free in finding your own way in what's interesting you in your as a student, in your practice, to investigate that.
Yes,
I think that's beautiful how you put that, and it's really resonating with me. Yeah,
and I think that also means that I was going to say it's ethical. I don't mean that in the sense of, have you done the ethics application properly? Is it all set out properly? But it seems to me to be unethical to get your students to do something which you then use and publish under your own name, which I understand is fairly common practice.
Yes, it is, isn't it? Yeah.
Whereas I think we would be horrified at that.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's not.
We don't we don't want to be joined to people. We don't want to have our names on things they've written, and unless we've co-written something
across. Yeah. And that resonates, and that's how I experience it. It does. And it's one thing about what you said about the ethical. I think it's a program that's the whole atmosphere and how the tutors and the supervisors help us. It's very ethical led. It's all about the relational part and relational ethics. And as a student, I constantly feel challenged to see, so where am I standing and what is my position and how do I put that in the world, which I very much feel as if it agrees for me very much to my systemic practice. So there's this movement in and out. Do you recognize that also?
Yeah. I think it's essentially the whole program really is based around ethics, and the idea that when we do research, what we should be doing is doing something that makes a difference.
Yeah.
A friend of mine once described PhD research as crawling along a line with a hand lens, with a sort of one of those things that means you just peer at something and don't see anything sort of outside. I think it was crawling along the edge of knowledge with a hand lens. Whereas I think we're very much thinking about where and how our research is situated.
It is, yeah. So, and that agrees with for how I see systemic practice, not only therapy, but systemic practice. It's constantly like focusing and zooming out and looking at the context.
Yes.
And going back in and then going back out. So that's really And I can, I can agree with that. That's how I doing it now, right now in 2021, is how I feel invited by you, by the program to do that. It's not always a good, easy, nice trip, I must admit, but but
Yes, I do think that certainly there were times when I was doing my doctorate where I thought, oh, why didn't I go for something where I knew what I had to do and what order things would be in, and I knew I had to do a literature review, and then I could follow it with this, and then follow it with that, and then have an analysis, and then have a discussion. The thing that was in a way was most difficult, I think, for me was working out how to present what I'd done, because I had to create the shape and the structure for it, because there was nothing else like it that I could look at.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and let's take that, because you said it was more of an total accident, I want to say, but that's not the word I should use. Like toevalligheid, coincidence that you enrolled in this program, and then you said, but it made so much sense because I had been doing something which was very successful. So would you mind telling us briefly about what you have been doing and how it enrolled and how your inquiry developed?
Right. Okay. So it's important to remember that we were only the second cohort. So in a way, everything was still being created as we went along. So no one had finished ever. There was the first cohort, and there was us, and yeah, so there wasn't the sort of structure and things that people have now, where they know that there are things they need to do at certain times. None of that existed really, although I think it did. It's just we didn't know about it, which caused some problems sometimes.
Yeah. But there was someone out there who knew.
There was someone out there in Bedfordshire that knew, yes, but it wasn't always clear to us that anyone else did.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I mean, I've said already that we developed this program, which we published, which began to have the sorts of results that we had never expected.
Yeah.
It's a program called Nonviolent Resistance, which was developed by Professor Haim Omer at the University of Tel Aviv. But what we did is we found ourselves developing it as a group program, whereas everywhere else it was being done as a sort of individual program with parents whose children were very violent, out of control, self-destructive, sometimes very, very withdrawn, not going out at all. And I think the thing that characterized it was that parents felt completely helpless and very, very distressed and just did not know what to do. And none of the usual sort of interventions that were around seemed to make any difference. So when we heard about this program, and Haim Omer came over and spent a couple of days talking to us about it, it became absolutely clear that this would offer a way of helping in those situations that we often came across where we really didn't know quite what to do, and the usual things were ineffective.
Yeah.
The young people didn't want to be seen by a therapist. The parents wanted us to fix the young people. The young people didn't want to be fixed. And it created a very difficult dynamic. And at that point, for this sort of difficulty, the main thing that was recommended was parenting groups. But of course, they weren't really designed for the sort of situations that we were seeing, which were very extreme. You know, they were designed more for situations where parents felt they couldn't get their children to get up or do their homework or come in on time. They weren't really the sort of things we were dealing with, where kids were sometimes being very violent at home. And what we found when we started running it, and we ran a sort of first pilot group, and literally made it up as we went along. I mean, obviously we followed the main structure of nonviolent resistance, but, you know, we were deciding each week what we would do the next week. And trying to plan a bit, but you know, we were really just winging it a bit. And by the end of it, parents were saying, this has changed our lives, which we certainly hadn't expected. Well, we had hoped it would improve things, but the situations were pretty extreme, and we hadn't expected that sort of response. And parents often, where there were two parents, were on the verge of breaking up because of the stress, so that relationships had become fractured in the parental dyad as well as with the children. And it was there that things really changed as well, that parents felt that they were coming together in a way which was repairing their relationship as well. So it seemed a really important thing to have a better look at. You know, what was it that we were doing?
What exactly?
What was happening? What were parents doing? What were the elements in there that were meaning that something that normally would have a high dropout rate, which those parenting groups, ordinary parenting groups do. They don't necessarily have good retention. We were not having a high dropout rate. We were having men as well as women, and that was unusual. And once parents had been part of a group, they could go on to become a parent facilitator for future groups. So that what we were doing was,
and that was new also.
I think that was quite new.
This kind of
So when we ran the next group, what we always did, whenever we ran a group, we would interview parents beforehand, and that's not because that we were wanting to see whether they should or shouldn't be part of it, because our experience led us to understand that you cannot predict who is going to be, you know, is going to find the program helpful. People who you would have thought were, you know, prime candidates for being able to do things. Often people like teachers couldn't. And people with perhaps not a very good grasp of English, with mental health problems, people who were refugees did very well. So could not predict. So we always took everyone, but what we wanted them to do was to understand what was involved. So they were already had a sense of it and weren't going to turn up and then throw.
And it was not so much about exclusion, but it was more about informing and telling them, this is what we're going to do, and would you feel comfortable with that? Something like that?
Yeah, it was beginning the process of getting to know them. But what we always did was that we always booked a room and we put tea and coffee and biscuits and things in it, and we put 2 graduate parents in there. And so every time we interviewed a parent, we would then take them down to the room with the graduate parents and say, if you'd like to have some tea or coffee and sit here have a chat to someone who's done this. And then we would leave them.
Yeah. So that was all, you said we were working with these people, and Jaime Omer came along, and he had this wonderful program with the very difficult, the edge of the difficult young people. We put it in a group, and as a matter of fact, it just developed in practice. And in the development of practice, sometimes we didn't even know what we were going to do, and then we took in the senior parents. You have another term for it, but I can really that.
We called them graduate parents.
Oh, graduates, yes.
Yeah.
Graduate parents.
They graduated from the course.
Yeah. Now I remember that I've heard you say that before. And then, so this was the practice, and you say it was so incredible, successful. We got so many beautiful comments from people who say this really saved us. And so the practice, kind of what you were saying earlier, the practice was the base of your inquiry.
Yeah.
Was it deserved?
Yeah, I think the practice invited the inquiry. Which is what was interesting. And it just so happened that I got invited along at exactly the point where the practice was saying, you need to look at what we're doing.
Yeah.
So it was a very nice coming together of things at just the right time.
Yeah.
There is a word for that, isn't there? But I can't remember what it is.
Right time, right place, something like that.
Synchronicity.
No, I couldn't say.
No. Okay.
I couldn't say. But this might be, a really, really a big difference. Like when we were talking before about what would be the difference between a PhD or a professional doctorate, how it begins. Here is an investigation that needs to be investigated, and here's the practice. And maybe this is how the doctorate work, the professional doctorate works. Like there is something in the practice that one experiences and is curious about, and that needs to develop further. And of course, even if you would have been in that meeting, I can imagine, and you wouldn't have been that curious about your own program and as eager to know more about it, then it wouldn't have fit also. But then you were curious and you had the program, and then it could grow, something like that.
Yes. One of the things I think that was interesting for me was that I think other people. I mean, obviously, I had something that I was wanting to investigate, as it were, and maybe other people came because they'd already been thinking about this and applied to this. They came with already something in mind.
Yeah.
And although I had something in mind, I didn't have any idea at all how I was going to look at it. Or so this is what would happen when I went to social events where somebody else who was doing a PhD would say to me, what's your research question? What's your research design? What's your research method? And I would say, I don't know, because I didn't yet know really what the question. I had no idea what the question was.
No,
the whole design idea was all emergent.
Yeah, and but it did get something. It became a design. It became a methodology. Can you tell something about what it became and how it
Yes
developed?
Well, I think right from the very beginning, I remember we used to have a monthly family therapists meeting, and I remember thinking sitting in the family therapists meeting, thinking this was at work. How am I going to try and make sense of this? And I began drawing And I remember the first things I drew. I probably still got the book. Were something that looked like sort of slices of cake with lots of layers, because I had this idea that I was trying to make sense of what happens in a group, and I was thinking there are lots of different layers of what's going on, because there's what the parents bring, there's what comes from the life stories of the parents, there's what comes from the actual things that are going on for them with their children. But the same is true of all the facilitators as well. And it depends, each time you run a group, you might not have the same people there. You might not have all the same facilitators. Lots of people wanted to be part of this group. So, we had lots of people involved. And I was thinking, so every group is different. And all the things that come together are different. So how do I find some way of picturing this or portraying it? So I started with these sort of cakes with layers. My original training is as a painter. That's what I did when other people went to university and did psychology and things. I went to art school and I did painting. Yeah. So I tend to think in pictures a bit.
Yes.
So I was, and then I started, I remember at another point, I started doing jigsaw puzzles, drawing jigsaw puzzles and thinking, because there's a bit about, what's missing, how you fit things together, how you try and make sense of things to make a picture. And then having done all the ethics bit and got the consent to run a group where everyone was going to be going to be a participant in my research as well. And the week before, I was thinking something about it. It's going to be really important to find a way of portraying this visually as well. And I went and bought 10 canvases, and they were 2 foot by 2 foot. So they're this sort of size.
Thank you for pointing that out, because I have no clue what a foot is.
No. 3 feet is a little under a meter.
Okay, thank you.
They're about 2/3 of a meter.
Yeah, I get. So you have quite big canvases, but not, yeah.
Yeah. And I thought, and I'll make something after each group, but I didn't really have any idea quite what I was going to make, and then I thought, if I'm going to do this when I come back after running a group, I'm not going to get back home till 8:30. I really don't want to be painting something that's going to take several hours. And I thought of something that I'd done years and years ago when I was still at school, which was using tissue paper, coloured tissue paper. And if you put layers of coloured tissue paper over one another, you get a sense of layering and different colours, and you get different effects. And I thought, well, I could do that. That would be quite quick. And so I bought an enormous box of hundreds of sheets of brightly coloured tissue paper. And I just tore them and pasted them onto the canvases. And I did that, and then I thought, oh, it would be even better if I got someone to interview me while I'm doing this. So I set up a camera, and I think for the first one, I got my partner to interview me, and I think something happened. I think the camera got dropped or something like that, and then I had to buy another one. So it was all a bit, very rushed. I was doing something, not sure how it was going to work. And at the last moment, before I left the group and came home, I said to the other facilitators, are there any words that you think resonate with this evening? So they gave me some words. So I had about 8 words. So I had those words in mind when I made the piece, and then I actually added them when it was dry. I stenciled them on in different places. So, but I still had no idea quite what I was doing or quite why. I was drawing on a lot of things. So I was drawing on my experience as a painter. I was drawing on my thinking about how do you find some way of portraying something that feels like it's bigger than something you could do in words.
Yes.
And I remember taking some of these paintings along to KCC and lining them up against the wall, and John Shotter looking at them and sort of not being sure what I was. He wasn't sure what I was doing, and I couldn't really articulate quite what I was doing either, because it was sort of beyond the level of articulation. I couldn't talk about it because, in a way, because what I was doing was doing it. I was doing something that I felt might show something additional to what I was able to write about and say.
Yes.
So I ended up with, in fact, up with 20 of these paintings. And then I had to think how to make them part of a doctorate.
Exactly. So there was this double layer, because at that time, as I get it right, you were already doing the doctorate, and you had already the participants in the group, the parents had already, it was already done that they were participants in the research as well. So it was step by step, and then through your work, through your experience as an artist, and what you can do with your hands and with your imagination, and make an artwork of it, that helped you to the next step to say, okay, so if this is what I've been doing, how can I put that in my research? So it sounds very organic.
I think it was, and a lot of the ideas emerged as I was doing it. So I ended up thinking, well, what I organised was I organised an evening for all the parents to come in and see the paintings, and I was going to record talking to them about it and things like that. And no one turned up.
Oh.
And so
it's a bummer. It's a wonderful idea. Why didn't they do it?
Yeah, I know. But sometimes in research, the best plans don't work out. And I thought, well, actually, they're finished with this group. They don't particularly want to come back. And for some people, it was a difficult experience. And those parents who were interested were meeting with one another on their own anyway. So I thought, well, okay. So then what I did was I put on an exhibition at a gallery, so I exhibited all the paintings, and that was on for a couple of weeks. It was a gallery in Bermondsey in London, and I arranged 3 events. And it's quite normal that you have certainly an event at the beginning of a show opening. So you have a private view. Now that's a common thing. So I had a private view, and most of the people I invited were in fact painters. And I talked about the work and something about it. And then I had the second event, which I invited therapists and parents to. And again, I did the same thing, talking about the work, providing food for people, And then there was a third event, which it was what's known as a décrochage. It's when you take the paintings down. So you have an opening when you put them up, and then you have an event at the end where you take them down.
Yeah.
So I had one at the end, and anyone who hadn't been able to go to any of the others came to that one. And we provided food and drink as well on that one. And there were parents who came to me and said that these were abstract paintings.
Yeah.
That it mirrored their felt experience of the journey of being part of the group. And that was very exciting for me, because in some ways I had hoped that might happen, but didn't really expect it would.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting. So I did that as part of it as well. So I then wrote about that experience too in the doctorate. So there was a sort of performing of it all as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, in a way, what you said is at that time when you took the painters to the program and you showed them, and John Schotter didn't know what to do with it, and you at that place, you didn't know. It all emerged very, very. It sounds very natural. I'm sure there were moments that you thought, "What am I doing?" But
oh yes, there were plenty of those.
It's always so comforting to hear you say that. But in the end, you must write it down. You must describe, because this is what the doctorate requires. You must write down. You must say, so this is what I've been doing, and this is why it's evidence. And can you tell something about how that process was for you? Was it all simultaneously, or was that afterwards?
Well, one of the things that happened was that as a doctoral group, we met in the same way as you do. And that went on for 3 years.
Yeah.
And at the very final meeting that we had, Kevin Barge was there, and he was supervising one of my colleagues. And I went back because I realized I'd left my coat in the room, and he was meeting with his supervisee to talk to them. I went back, and as I picked my coat up, he said to me, "There's something you might find interesting called portraiture." And I hadn't heard of that before. And so I went away and immediately got the book. And it fitted with what I was doing. It was just, again, one of those moments where things come together. I remember when I was reading it, she was writing about what I was doing, but she was writing about creating narrative portraits in words. So I thought, well, but I'm doing something more than that. And I thought about, I had a next door neighbour who was doing a course at the Open University on systems. And she thought this was the same as what I was doing. So she quite often came in and talked to me and brought me things that they'd been doing on her course. Of course, her course was completely different to anything I was doing. But I'm a polite person, so I listened to.
So you listened every week
about systems. And she said, and this is something you might find interesting. She said, it's called rich pictures.
Oh, yeah.
It's something we use in systems methodology for creating pictures of things that are felt and that you can't sort of write about in the same way. And I thought, well, that sounds really interesting. And I had a real look. I had a look and a Google for some rich pictures, and none of them seemed what I would call rich at all. So they didn't have colour and depth, and they didn't have richness in terms of anything visual. Yes, they were, they were better than just doing a sort of mind map with words, because they had images and things like that, but they didn't have that sense that I had been hoping for. So then what I did is, I married the idea of rich pictures and thought of my pictures as rich with the idea of portraiture, which was evocative portraits of people who were involved in the whole process, parents, facilitators. I did a portrait of the group, and I did a self-portrait. So again, the sort of methodology emerged.
Exactly.
And I brought two things together to create something that was new.
Yes. So that became a very practice-based, you started it from the practice and the curiosity about what happened in the group. And then you started a doctorate, and it was a very practice-based and personal-based methodology, which you designed, not with the idea I'm going to design it now, but it went along. Yeah. So that's kind of, and again, I'm in the middle of it now, and I don't think it's easy, but it feels very privileged to be able to do it like that, because you can keep very attuned to what you're doing and how it fits with you, instead of what my initial idea was when I was starting this, or maybe I'll do that, and if I would have done that, it wouldn't have fitted the practice. So again, maybe that's really what is taught in this program and encouraged in this program. Stay where you are, and let it be led by your practice.
It's a bit unsettling place to be at, though.
It is, yeah. But this is supposed to be like a public relations talk as well. So for everyone, Liz is still survived it, and she's tutor now, and I'm in my third year and doing very well.
But then I think you see something at doctoral level should be unsettling.
It is, of course. It should be difficult, because you want to do something new. You want to see where is knowledge, where is practice, what do I see, what am I curious about, and where's the gap. So and where a gap is, it is unsettling. Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the things that I sometimes think about research is you sometimes see research where the research question is something which you can see there's an obvious answer to. So someone's done a whole lot of research into, whether there are adverse effects of domestic violence on children. Well, it's obvious there are. So, you're not, in a sense, and maybe that's not such a good example, but it does seem to me that often people do research where the answer is obvious before you do it. And for me, that seems that there's less point in doing something where you already know what you think the answer is.
Yes.
And you're just trying to confirm it.
Yeah.
Whereas I didn't really know what the answer was. I didn't really quite know what the question was for quite some time. And I certainly didn't know what the methodology was going to be until quite a long way into it. Although I had already been doing it, I just hadn't known what I was doing.
Exactly. So that's another part of it. Now that you say that, it's like like looking with focus, like in and out zooming at your own practice. So what is it that I'm doing? You know, not taking it for granted that it's there, that you're doing it, but investigating it in depth at sometimes as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's and that's this process that I think is a bit unsettling.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. There wasn't any obvious structure for how I would present all this material either. So I had to decide how to do it, how to design that. Whereas if there'd been the standard, introduction, literature review, research question, sort of data analysis, discussion, conclusion, that would all been very straightforward. And I could have followed that, but it didn't fit with what I was doing.
No. So that's when you have a kind of wishes, when you maybe you're interested in seeing if this program would fit you, you need to be prepared for some unsettling times, and the kind of wishes you have for a kind of program that it's very close to yourself and very close to your own practice. And it's not really, sorry.
I was just thinking, I don't think it means that people can't do something that has a more traditional research.
No, not at all. Absolutely not.
Yeah, certainly that some people prefer to do that.
And even, in tradition. I'm sorry, I had a delay.
Right. No, I was just saying, I don't think there's, if some people will prefer to stick with a traditional research design, so you don't have to be doing something. I remember talking to one cohort about what I'd been doing, or what I'd done, and I could see some of them, their eyes glazed over in horror. So it's really important to say that, you don't have to do something like I did, but I needed to do it.
And do something that fits with you as a person, and do something that fits with your practice. And even when you say traditional research, however that might look like, I think there are lots of unsettling things in those as well. So it's just really like coming together with your own practice and your own curiosity about the practice, and putting yourself in the middle. Not that it's about you, but that it's your research. It's not about doing the research; it's about doing who is doing the research as well, because that makes a lot of difference. When I would have done exactly the same, it would have been something else than what you did, because I'm a different person.
Absolutely.
That's really very in the core of what we're doing here. Yeah. So
but one of the exciting things for me is that certainly in recent cohorts, there've been people who'd already heard of portraiture, who've come wanting to do that. So I'm going to do a seminar on portraiture and rich portraiture.
Yeah.
Now, I never would have imagined that happening, I don't think.
No. So that's how things evolve.
Yeah.
Also, because you have been doing something in that area, and somewhere else maybe other people have been doing that as well, and so then there are all building blocks to other knowledge and to other ideas, and which I think that's the exciting part of science and of inquiring, that at some point it contributes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we should come to an end to wrap this session up. So is there anything that I didn't ask, or where what you would have hoped that I would ask you, or something that needs to be said about that you think, oh yeah, but this is important for me to say?
I don't think so. I mean, what I hope is that people will have a sense that there's a lot of fun to be had as well, and excitement.
I agree.
You know, in sort of creating new ideas, hearing about other people's ideas, playing with ideas together. Yeah.
I absolutely agree on that, Liz. And I think this is just one of the interviews that is being done, because the program is 15 years old now. So they, everyone who's interested, they can look at a lot of interviews, so hear a lot of different stories. And I think that's, that I hope, but I'm sure that's exactly that it's unsettling, but it's a lot of fun and a lot of excitement in it as well.
Yeah.
That all shines through. Yeah. So let's wrap this up then. Thank you very, very much for your time and for your story.